Welcome to the Brain Soup Podcast. If you hear the word hippie, what do you think of? Do you think of the 60s? Well, obviously. Do you think of people dancing barefoot? Do you think meat is murder, man? Do you think protests, especially the Vietnam protests? These things normally come up, but I think the hippie movement is misunderstood in many different areas. Now, keep in mind, I understand a lot of my audience have hardships when it comes to the hippie generation. Boomers, they call it. Okay, boomers. Keep in mind, I have some issues with this generation, don't get me wrong. But I think the message still holds up of peace, love, forgiveness, and putting aside our differences to come together. I think those things still hold up. Now, the way they would want it to happen may be a little outdated, but for what it was, I think the hippie generation tried their best. But what happened to the hippie generation? And that's what we're going to talk about today on the Brain Soup Podcast. Now, I have made a podcast about this situation before. It got copyrighted because of a Jimi Hendrix song. So, I'm not going to play any music, but I am going to try to be as entertaining as I can. Before we can actually talk about the hippies themselves, we kind of have to go back a little bit to the 50s. You see, at the time, everything was kind of one note. You're either at this time people see you as a good citizen, kind of family man or family woman, keeping a white picket fence in your house, having 4 or 10 kids, maybe a dog, and that's it. Or you're a commie, they call you. There was no middle ground back then. You were either a good old American or just a fascist commie. Until a group of people had enough. These group of people were called the Beatnecks. Now, the Beatnecks were a group of people who questioned things. One of the things they questioned was, okay, these people talk about fascism all the time, but what about Americans' version of fascism? What about Americanism? What about the fact they try so hard to keep us in these chains? Why do we have to get married all our lives and die? Why and grow our kids up to do the same thing? Why can't we live a better life, man? One of these Beatnecks was by the name of Allen Ginsberg. Now, Allen Ginsberg wrote a famous book, Howl. Howl was very controversial for this day, referencing everything to life, referencing things to homosexuality, to drug references, to basically everything what was about to come to the counterculture. Moving away from the 50s to the early 1960s, a lot of young people especially were going up to San Francisco, mostly to see this guy named Timothy Leary. You've probably heard of Timothy Leary when he said his famous words, "tune in, drop out." He was the big pusher of drugs and all that stuff, psychedelic drugs. To him, now keep in mind, a lot of people get misunderstood about the hippies. Mostly younger people today think hippies were just, druggies. But what a lot of people don't understand, back in the day, for a lot of people, they actually thought drugs could change the world in a positive way. Believe it or not, back in the day, LSD wasn't really known to the public back then. It was just a serious thing. So, back in, they thought, why not use this to change the world? If governments use it, if politicians use it, we could change the world. And people like Timothy Leary really pushed this. And the music culture and everything took advantage of this, and it was pretty much going on strong. So what happened to the hippie movement? I'll tell you what happened. Wall Street. Wall Street saw what was going on with the hippies, saw a couple people dress kind of goofy looking, and go, how can we make this into a profit? Peace signs, jewelry, all that stuff. Let's sell this as a profit. Take away from the hippie movement. And not just Wall Street, but you also have people who banned the drug culture. And even though there's a lot of controversy about that, that was also a big fall down. Also, a lot of the hippies from the 60s either carried on, live off the grid, never talked to anyone outside of their family who they created, or they become big-time sellout yuppies and only wanted money. That was kind of the beginning, the end, and the death of the hippie movement. Nowadays, we kind of have mixed bags of hippies. What do I mean by that? Well, we have the New Age movement, what is kind of a continuation of the hippie kind of. However, I wouldn't call it necessarily hippie, though. And the thing is, I don't know if the hippie movement could ever come back. Why? Because it's hard to explain. It's like, and not just because it was a thing that happened and never happened again. Obviously, it can come back in a retro way. But I'm not talking about it in a retro sense. I'm talking about it in the sense of young people trying to make a difference. Now, I know there's a lot of young people trying to make a difference, but maybe the hippie movement just seems silly and outdated nowadays. I don't know. Maybe it's time for us to move on, because we can make a real change. Because keep in mind, a lot of these hippies who are still doing it are living off the grid, you know. And I don't know. It is interesting, but I don't know if it's ever coming back, necessarily. But what do you think? Do you think we need the hippie movement to come back? Do you think maybe we can? Or do you think for the time it was great, but maybe a little, it's just not reasonable? Because yeah, everybody can say peace not war, or make love not war, but what about actually doing it and not saying it? You know, there's a difference between saying something and doing something. But anyway, have a good day and bye everyone. This has been a Brain Soup Podcast.